We are going through a pivotal moment in the Jewish experience, in the global experience, the human experience, and we're so pleased to be able to bring our faculty together to think about other times of crisis and possibility in our history, distant history, recent history, to help us reflect on what we're going through now. Our session today is Beyond the Flag, the Religious Dimensions of Yom Ha'atzma'ut, Israel Independence Day, with Rabbi Eliezer Diamond. So it's for those who were with us last week, we're shooting 2,000 years forward from what Professor Kramer was talking about last week, responding to the destruction of the temple, the rabbis responding to the destruction of the temple with new kinds of creativity and finding spiritual outlets for spiritual connection, communal connection, in very innovative ways after the structures that they had fell apart. So we'll hear a very different take on those broad themes today. So just a few announcements before we begin. I want to thank the members of the community engagement team who've been working on this series. Rabbi Tim Bernard, our Director of Digital Learning, will be facilitating the call today. Stacy Firestone, Tani Schwartz-Herman, and others on the team as well. I wanted to make sure, you've probably been using Zoom a lot by now, but just to make sure you know a few technical things. So first of all, we recommend that you use a speaker view rather than gallery view. So that's in the top corner of your black or dark gray screen. You can click speaker view, click gallery view, to see that little, if you're in speaker view, you'll probably see a little icon of a grid of 9 dots. If you're in gallery view, you can see where it says speaker view. We recommend speaker view so that you can see Rabbi Diamond's face teaching, but if you prefer to see a whole gallery of folks, you can do that as well. Secondly, about questions. So Rabbi Diamond will be pausing for questions periodically throughout the class, and we also have time reserved for Q&A at the end. And we're going to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to ask questions, so we can hear the questions in your own voice. So if you'd like to raise your hand, you feel free to practice it right now. You click where it says participants at the bottom, and then in the white area that opens, look for a hand icon. So you click the hand to raise your hand, click again to lower the hand, and we will call on you. We'll call on individuals and unmute you when it's your turn. So when you hear your name called, if you're asking a question, that's how you will know that you're unmuted, and you can go ahead and ask. If you're participating by phone, the way to raise your hand is by dialing *9, and dial *9 again to lower your hand. The email that you received with the link for today's session, the Zoom link, also included a link to the source sheet. So make sure that you have that. We're not going to be screen sharing the source sheet because we want to be able to see Rabbi Diamond speaking, but do make sure you have that sheet from the email that you received. So finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Diamond, who is the Rabbi Judah H. Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS, where he teaches courses in rabbinic literature and introductory, intermediate, and advanced Talmud studies. He has written on prayer, asceticism, and issues of environmental law and ethics. He's the author of Holy Men and Hunger Artists, Fasting and Asceticism in Rabbinic Culture. He's currently working on 2 book projects. He's editing a commentary on Yerushalmi Psachim written by the late Professor Louis Ginsburg. And he's also writing a book on prayer that will address the problem of cognitive dissonance for the contemporary worshiper and offer readings of traditional liturgy that use midrashic methodology to find meaning and relevance in our prayers for the modern Jew. Rabbi Diamond was ordained at the Yeshiva University, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, and received his doctorate in Talmud at JTS. And Rabbi Diamond, thank you so much for teaching us today.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm going to gently...
We don't hear you.
You don't hear me now? You don't hear me? Tim heard me.
I'm hearing you fine. Yeah, we were fine. We hear you, Eliezer.
Okay. All right. I want to disagree gently, or modify, I guess would be a better word, what Julia said when she said that we're fast forwarding 2,000 years. Since we're talking about Jewish tradition, we are and we aren't. And that's really a major point. That's at the heart of what we're going to be talking about today. I'll mention a distinction that Yosef Yerushalmi makes, the historian Yosef Yerushalmi makes in his book Zachor. He distinguishes between history and memory. History, and thinking in historical terms, is a relatively modern phenomenon, which means that I have historical consciousness, and I stand outside of events and analyze them and study them, and they are discontinuous in that what happened in 1776 or 1947 or 220 happened to a particular group of people in particular historical, cultural, political context. I can relate to it, but it is not my experience. Memory is taking the past and both shaping it and being shaped by it. So we, not that long ago, celebrated Pesach. So when we celebrate Pesach, we imagine an event and describe it in a certain way, and then that becomes inspiration for us. So here too, if we want to understand Yom Ha'atzma'ut, the observances of Israel Independence Day, we have to understand what were the sources upon which those who formulated the observances of Yom Ha'atzma'ut, what did they draw upon? Why did they draw upon those particular sources, and how has that shaped observance today? Related to this, but slightly differently, I want to tell you a story. I'm a storyteller, so here's a story. Our son Matan made Aliyah in October, and we speak to him virtually every day. And yesterday he told us the following story. He has a neighbor, Iris, and Iris knows that he's on his own. So she's been supplying him with meals periodically. He got a call, I think it was yesterday, from the Matnas, the community center, saying, we heard, clearly from Iris, that you're on your own and you could use some home-cooked meals. So we're going to deliver some home-cooked meals to you. As he's in this phone conversation, he gets another call, someone else. I'm a member at the community center. I heard that you could use some home-cooked meals. I'd like to bring you some meals. Hangs up the phone. 5 minutes later, there's another call. I'm associated with the community center. I heard you could use some home-cooked meals. Maybe I can bring you some home-cooked meals. Fortunately, Matan is a very disciplined eater. So however much food he got, he's okay. But the key word that I would use to describe what's going on there is connection. All of these people feel connected with him for many reasons, including the fact that he's made a decision, not an easy one, on his own to move to a new country, a new culture. And of course, right now, there are particular difficulties. And that creates a sense of connection between him and not only these people, but Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, because he's experiencing citizens of that state, people coming and connecting with him. Now, I mention that because one of the key questions, one of the key challenges in creating a holiday and in observing a holiday, the key word is connection. Am I connected with that holiday? And let me give you some particulars, issues that can arise. A holiday commemorates something that happened elsewhere. Is it my holiday? It commemorates an event in the past from long ago. Is it my holiday? The historical realities surrounding the holiday complicate my relationship to it. Is it my holiday? Subsequent events complicate my relationship to it. Is it my holiday? Is there a recoverable transhistorical value or set of values that inspire me and that are worthy of commemoration? Is it my holiday? And of course, regarding that question, it's often contested. What is the significance? What is the significance of Passover? Well, if you have another 10 hours, I'd be happy to discuss that with you, because obviously that's contested. And the same, needless to say, is true of Yom Ha'atzma'ut, and we'll come to that. My wife Shelley mentioned, I didn't grow up with the holiday. Is it my holiday? Does it have an inspiring ritual? Is it my holiday? So in short, going back to the distinction that I mentioned of Yosef Yerushalmi, is it just history or is it worthy of memory? Something that happened or something that in some sense is happening for me now? It's a usable past. I can return to it and find meaning in it. So that's what I want to talk about with you with regard to Yom Ha'atzma'ut. But apropos of the first thing that I said, we can't go to 1947. We have to go to, well, we're starting, I guess, in about the 5th century BCE. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of the centuries, and even these we're not going to do in detail, but we need to go back a little bit. And I want to take examples. I want to talk about Purim in particular and a little bit about Hanukkah, but look to the past at holidays that we could say are post-classical. Yes, Purim is biblical in that the Megillah is in part of Tanakh. Exactly when the Megillah is written is not clear. 5th century, 4th century. There are other scholars who have dated it later. Right now, what I just mentioned to you is the consensus, but stay tuned. Maybe scholarly opinion will shift once again. Okay, but so how do you create a holiday? How do you create a holiday? All right, so let's look at Purim and look at its being created and its subsequent significance. So it celebrates something that happens in Persia. The Megillah itself was written probably in Persia, maybe in Asia Minor. Was Purim observed in Eretz Yisrael? Eventually it was, but when? Not clear. The second book of Maccabees mentions the day of Mordechai, very end of the second book of Maccabees, but the second book of Maccabees itself was probably written in North Africa and not in Eretz Yisrael. But certainly when we get to the time of the rabbis, Purim is a widely observed Jewish holiday. And there's a whole tractate in the Talmud, Masechet Megillah, that talks about this holiday. Now, I want to point out something. Most scholars believe that there was a holiday, let's call it Purim, and what the name Purim means, also not entirely clear. Let's say it means the holiday of lots. And that in fact was its original meaning, right? Clearly in the Megillah, that's its meaning. But was that its original meaning? So we have this holiday. The Megillah seems to have been written to commemorate that holiday. And then the Megillah, the reading of the Megillah, becomes part of the observance of the holiday. A little sort of a Mobius strip moment here. In other words, the Megillah itself was commemorating something else. But after it was written, at a certain point, it was decided that it itself would become part of the commemoration. And so now Jews are observing Purim. And they are not only observing Purim, but they are creating new Purims. Throughout Jewish history, different communities and individuals created their personal Purims. So if you look, for example, on the source sheet on page 2, I'll just quote to you from Wikipedia something about one of the Purims called Purim Vince. which commemorates the Fet Milch uprising. There was a period when Jews were massacred and chased out of Frankfurt. And so the community of Frankfurt created, and it actually was around the time of Purim. So the community of Frankfurt created their own Purim. And there is a Megillat Vince. Okay, someone wrote a poem in Yiddish, but also in Hebrew. And it's known as a Megillah, a scroll, which is an archaic term. And so what's going on here? What's going on here is people are looking back at Purim and they're saying, there's something about that story that speaks to me in this moment. I'm living through a Purim moment. And when I want to figure out how to express express Thanksgiving and celebration for this moment, I'm looking to the past to find religious models that work. And that model is Purim. That is the model for diaspora holidays. There's also a certain irony here in that it is just about universally agreed that the Megillat Esther, is a novella. Okay? It's not a record of historical events, it's a novella, it's a romance. And yet, it becomes the basis for the celebration of Purims based on actual historical events. And why is that? Because Purim taps into something very deep. It taps into the historical experience of diaspora Jews until, I would say, until we come to the American experience, really. And that is, you are a stateless people subject to the powers and the whims of the subjugating authority. And from time to time, that means exile. From time to time, that means death. And Megillat Esther is a sort of fantasy fulfillment, right? A what if, sort of like, what is it, Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards? Is that the movie that I mean? I didn't see it. Or Hunters. A what if that's a fantasy fulfillment, which is, what if we were powerful? What if we could stand up to our enemies? That's Megillat Esther. And this becomes the inspiration for Jews later who feel that they are able to overcome their enemies. But I want to make one important point about Megillat Esther before we go on and leave Purim. And that is, the rabbis themselves understood the fantastic nature of Purim, that it is a sort of fantasy. A very, very poignant passage in the Talmud. The Talmud in Tractate Arachin 11ab discusses the holidays on which Hallel is to be recited. One of the holidays on which Hallel is the Psalms 113 to 118, which comprise what is sometimes called Hallel Mitzri, the Egyptian Hallel, the Hallel that is recited on Passover and other holidays, Sukkot, Shavuot, and also Hanukkah. We'll come to that. So the Talmud says, why don't we recite Hallel on Purim? After all, if Hallel was recited to commemorate Passover, when it was a question of going from enslavement to liberation, in the time of Purim, it was life and death. Wouldn't that be a reason for instituting Hallel? The Talmud answers, how does Hallel begin? Hallelujah, hallelu abdei Hashem. Praise God, praise, offer praise, you servants of God. Va'anan akate abdei da'achashverosh anan. But we, says the 4th century Rabbi Ravas says, but we, meaning him and his generation, we are still the servants of Achashverosh. Purim is not the time to say the Hallel that was said when the Jews left Egypt, because it's a difference between salvation and liberation. Salvation means I live to fight another day, but my status is the same. That's what happened in Purim. Passover was transformational. We were this motley crew of slaves, and we became, or we began to become, a people, a nation. For that, we can say we've now become the servants of God. On Purim, we can't say it. So the rabbis themselves are aware that the holiday of Purim describes salvations, being saved from death, but it's still very much a diaspora holiday. The political and military situation has not changed. And the same thing could happen again. We're going to need another Purim. And that's the story of all these subsequent Purims. In B'chol Davar Dar, in every generation, as the Haggadah says, there are threats. If we're fortunate, if God smiles upon us, if you want to say it that way, then we're saved. But maybe not. But maybe not. So that's the story of Purim. Let's stop here. Maybe people have questions or comments that they would like to make. Okay. Oh, yes.
Betsy?
Oh, hi. Yes, my thought is that inside Purim, it's all about transformation, right? It's all about you look like one thing, but you're really another, with Hadassah becoming Esther, Esther Hadassah, all of that. So the entire, and mask and unmasking. So the entire holiday itself is filled with transformation. So it's interesting you say that it's not a transformative holiday when it's the leitmotif of the entire story.
So that's an interesting point. I would distinguish between transformation and concealment. And I think a lot of what Purim is about, in a way, it goes in the other direction. It's that I'm a Jew, but not always. Sometimes I don't share that information. I'm a Jew, but I'm named Mordechai after the Babylonian god Marduk. So I think it's less about transformation in the sense that I mean it, this kind of national transformation, and more about concealment, which itself, I think, is a very diaspora phenomenon. I always talk about names in this context. My father's name is Edward. When he's called to the Torah, he's Yehuda Idel ben Azriel Elchana. But in his life, that's the only place where he's Yehuda Idel. I'm Eliezer, but on my birth certificate, I'm Elliot. And at a certain point, as a member of Bnei Akiva, being in a Zionist headspace, I became Eliezer. I decided I'm using my Hebrew name, which my parents actually were not happy about, even though they just felt that's not your name. Your name's Elliot, but okay, I'm Eliezer. My children are Aviva, Tova, Yoni, David, and Matan, right? So in other words, their names are Jewish names. End of story. So how we negotiate our diaspora identities is an interesting question. Anybody else? Let's take two more.
Tybal?
Hi, and my religious name is also my Zoom name when I'm doing those of Judaic content. When you were talking about Purim, in a sense, through history and what it became, and knowing that we're going to get to Yom Ha'atzma'ut, sorry about the pronunciation, I was thinking about the continuum of holidays. And for me, the newest one that I know about in the state of Israel, I live in the States, is Yom Ha'aliyah. And what I know is very little. So if it's okay, because to me that's the opposite end of the continuum, where it's new, it's recently formulated. I don't know that much about what the state has done. Anyway, if you have anything you could add as you're contrasting holidays in different phases of their life cycle as holidays, I would be interested.
So I'm sorry to disappoint you. I really don't have anything to say about Yom Ha'aliyah. I would point out, though, that what we are doing or about to do is to play, if those of us who are old enough to remember the television show You Are There. And we're going to go back to the moment of the founding of the state and shortly thereafter, and saying, so this becomes, not in the moment that the state is founded, but shortly after that, this day, the declaration of the founding of the State of Israel becomes a holiday worthy of celebration. So how do you create this holiday, and what does this holiday mean? That's what I want to look at, and in particular, the religious aspects of it. Okay, I think one more and then we'll move on.
Janice?
Yeah. Hi. I was really, thank you very much, Rabbi. I was really struck by your comment about the difference between history and memory, because I am starting in my new career as a folklorist. And we talk a lot about history and memory, and also creating memories through folklore and folk life. And and especially my interest in Jewish folk life. So I just.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's definitely related to that theme. Absolutely. So, I mean, to put it another way, by creating a past, we're also creating a present and a future. Okay, so let's look at Yom Ha'atzma'ut. So as we say, it commemorates the day on which the state of Israel was declared. And let's just note that on that day, Ben-Gurion, I don't know, did he actually read from it? I think he did, read from the Megillat Ha'atzma'ut. Notice that description, the Independence Scroll, and it's a calligraphed document. I don't know if it's actually parchment. I don't know if anyone here knows the answer to that one. But if you look at it, let's see. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, can you see that? I'm very impressed with myself, actually. I don't know if I'll be able to get back, but you can see that it's archaized. Okay, it's not something that somebody typed up on a typewriter or even printed. Okay, it has that archaic look to it, and that is a way of giving it authenticity. It's instantly traditional when you write it in that way. And when you call it a Megillah, that is also a way of describing scroll, right? We don't write scrolls anymore. It's a way of giving it that sense of authenticity, something old, something traditional, creating instant tradition. So let's think about what is happening on this day and what there is to be commemorated on this day. So now I'm David Ben-Gurion. So for me, this is the realization of what we might call a secular messianist dream. Right? Because for Ben-Gurion, we are escaping from the diaspora cycle, and let's really use the word that he would use, the Golah, the exile, right? I'm escaping from the condition of exile, in that I now have power, I now have political and military self-determination. But let's face it, for Ben-Gurion also, we're escaping from a culture in which, I think to his mind, Jews are, well, we don't make that gesture, but right, we're kind of hoping and praying, which Megillat Ha'atzma'ut actually mentions, for God to save us, for a Messiah to come from somewhere, right? And this moment is the moment in which Jews are saying, we're not waiting in that way anymore. We are taking hold of events for ourselves. Redemption is not going to come through some supernatural event from some divinely ordained Messiah. Redemption is going to come through human agency. And here it is. And we've done it. If I'm a religious individual, I can't accept that as the description or as a way of framing the event. Certainly, I can't accept this as a way of exiting traditional Jewish thought and life and dreams. So how do we negotiate that? So there's a very interesting phrase in the Megillat Atzma'ut. I'm going to show you the English translation, and I'll explain. Whoops, what did I do? Okay, that's not what I wanted to show you. Yeah, here we are. So you'll notice at the end of the Megillat Atzma'ut, move this, it talks about faith in the Rock of Israel. I myself can't see it right now, but I know it's there. The rock, here we go. Placing our trust, at the very end it says, placing our trust on the Rock of Israel, we affix our signatures to this proclamation at this session, and so on. And then you have the signatures. Last paragraph. Can I show that again? Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel. See those last two lines? We fix our signatures to this proclamation. Now, Rock of Israel. The original Hebrew Rock of Israel is Tzur Yisrael. Who is the rock, or what is the Rock of Israel? Well, there was a big debate when the language was being hammered out, right? Needless to say, they didn't put somebody in a room, just say, write it out and we'll sign it. There was major debate about the wording. And one of the debates was, are we going to mention God in this document? Right? Because the state is being founded by, among others, many people who are atheists, who are principled atheists, right? Not agnostic types of atheists, I don't know, maybe not, but people who are saying, in a sense, religion is the opiate of the masses. And what we need to do is to shake that off and to become self-determining people. So we don't want God in the Megillat Atzma'ut. And others, religious people signing, said, on the contrary, we see the hand of God in this event. So we want God to be mentioned. So what's the compromise? The compromise is that we put our trust in the Rock of Israel. What is the Rock of Israel? Whatever you want it to be. Now, that having been said, for a religious person, Tzur Yisrael has resonance. For those of you who are familiar with traditional liturgy, you know that immediately before the morning Amidah, one recites, prays, Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, O Rock of Israel, rise up to aid Israel. Well, in that context, there's no question who Tzur Yisrael is. It's God. But there's plausible deniability here. Right? You can say Tzur Yisrael means whatever you wanted to say. We should add that in the prayer for the state of Israel, and you can see the beginning of that prayer on page 8. You want to look at it now. And we'll look at version 1. We read, Avinu b'sheba shamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'goalo, Barech, it should be, et midinat Yisrael reshit tzmichat gulatenu. Our Father in heaven, okay, sorry, 2 typos there, Rock and Redeemer of Israel, right? Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Teichnu Mecha, Goalenu, right? So Tzur Yisrael, Rock of Israel, and Goalenu, Goel, Redeemer, is also from that same phrase, that same liturgical phrase. So the author, and not entirely clear who the authors are, of the prayer for the state of Israel are saying You know how in the Megillat Atzma'ut, in the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, it says that we rely on the Tzur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel? Well, let me tell you who that is. The Rock of Israel is Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. That's who the Rock of Israel is. It's sort of a midrash, a polemical midrash on that phrase, Rock of Israel, in the Megillah. Okay. So now let's talk about how Yom Ha'atzma'ut is observed, or let's go directly. Let's go directly to, we're formulating a religious observance of Yom Ha'atzma'ut. So how do we do that? What do we draw upon? What path do we draw upon? So of course, the most promising model is Hannukah. Right? Hanukkah is a battle for the ability to live religious life, Jewish religious life fully, and it's about political independence. Okay. So, and how was Hanukkah observed in the Rabbinic period? Hanukkah was observed in the Rabbinic period with the recitation of Hallel, right, those Psalms 113 to 118. And there was a special prayer that was added to the Amidah. And what is that prayer? We can see that on page 3. Okay. And notice what that prayer says. It's Al Hanisim, which I'm assuming is familiar to many, many people. But I just want to read through part of it. If you count down in the English, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. Al Hanisim says, "You waged their battles, defended their rights, and avenged the wrong done to them. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the wanton sinners into the hands of those who occupy themselves with your Torah." So what's happening here? If we look at the actual events of Purim, of Hanukkah, there were military victories. How did that happen? How did the Maccabees prevail? The answer of Al Hanisim is God's hand. God gave victory to the Maccabees. And one of the ways that we know that their victory was not simply kochi ve'otzem yadi, the product of their own military prowess, is that it was the many put into the hands of the few. That should not have happened. That's not normal or natural. That's what this prayer is emphasizing. And therefore, we have no option but to see this as something miraculous. So now, if I'm a religious Jew and I'm thinking about Yom Ha'atzma'ut, right? Now, I'm thinking about Yom Ha'atzma'ut, not on Yom Ha'atzma'ut, but in the aftermath, the ability of Israel to defend itself and to maintain its independence. I mean, this itself was a debate whether the day of celebration should be Yom Ha'atzma'ut itself, the day of declaration of the state, or some later day when the existence of the state was militarily secured. That's a discussion for another time, okay? But so there's a political military victory here, and it is seen as being God's hand involved in this military victory, as was the case with Hanukkah, and therefore Hanukkah is the right model for Yom Ha'atzma'ut. Let's just stop here for a minute. Any questions or comments here? Okay. Oh, okay. Tim?
Aneta?
Why would you say Hanukkah and not Pesach? Because there's only there is a congregation who have a Haggadah Yom Ha'atzma'ut. So why Hanukkah, not Pesach?
That's an excellent question, and it really has to do with what I want to talk about, which is Hanukkah is about political self-determination. Hanukkah is a time when Jews, for this rather short period, if you look at the entire Second Temple period, this is this very short period from about the 140s BCE to about 63 BCE when Pompey comes into Jerusalem. This very short period where, relatively speaking, Jews are independent. They govern themselves. And this, of course, is the great significance, certainly for Ben-Gurion, but not just for Ben-Gurion. See, and here's the thing. So here you come to the religious question. Are you going to see Yom Ha'atzma'ut simply as a day when Jews were saved, or the precursor of this war in which Jews were saved and they have a state to save them from destruction? Or is something more transformative happening here? Jews are now taking hold once again, after so many centuries, millennia, of their own destiny. If you're thinking in that second category, then you want Hanukkah. You don't want Pesa. Okay? Jews leaving Egypt were Israelites. They weren't engaged in battles. Okay? God was doing the heavy lifting, as it were. Hanukkah, we were doing the heavy lifting. Let's take another one.
George?
I have a question. Is Hallel also not said on Purim because God is not specifically mentioned in Megillat Esther? So where do we get to that? Secondly, is the idea if the books of the Maccabees are not in the Tanakh, how did the Al HaNisim prayer get into the Amidah?
Right. So let's leave aside the Purim question. That's really the question here, or a question that I wanted to come to, but your question is a perfect segue to that, which is, when I'm constructing a holiday, I'm constructing a religious observance of Yom Ha'atzma'ut. Question one is, what are my models? Because I'm probably not just going to create a whole new observance from whole cloth. I'm going to go back to the past. And remember, one of the reasons for doing that is it gives more authenticity to the holiday that I'm creating now, if it includes familiar and established rituals. And the second question, which is related to the first, is how much power do I have, religiously speaking, halachically speaking, to create something new? And this is one of the great questions surrounding the observances of Yom Ha'atzma'ut. And I'm going to take this opportunity, instead of taking another question, I'm going to take this opportunity, apropos of your question, to look at the various views. If you take a look on page 5, the various views of how Yom Ha'atzma'ut is observed religiously. If you look at the bottom of page 5, the Yom Ha'atzma'ut observances, you see one of my points in that chart is that Yom Ha'atzma'ut is a secular holiday and it's a religious holiday. Right? So if you look on the right, there's folk dancing, folk songs, military parade, and so on. So these are folk celebrations. They're secular celebrations. They're not religious celebrations. But then you have the question of religious celebrations. And here I've created 2 columns because there was and is debate about what religious observances should be included in Yom Ha'atzma'ut. So the chief rabbinate, that's the extreme left-hand column, takes the more conservative position, say a so-called half Hallel. In other words, not to say all of the Psalms of 113 through 118, but to omit two sections of two of the Psalms, okay, with no bracha before the Hallel. Okay. A haftarah is recited, but again without a bracha. Now this is a very important decision, a decision not to recite a bracha. Let's take a look for a moment on page 4, passage at the top of page 4, source number 5. One of the observances of Hanukkah is to light Hanukkah candles, as we all know. We also know that before one lights the Hanukkah candles, one recites a blessing, and the blessing is Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Hanukkah. We say, blessed are you, God, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us with the commandments and commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles. So the Talmud in passage 5 records that. And then in line 3 words in the English, the Gemara asks, and where did he command us? Where exactly in the Torah is it stated that we should light Hanukkah candles? Obviously, you can look high and low, but it ain't there. So what's the deal? So the Talmud says, right, the mitzvah of Hanukkah is not mentioned in the Torah. So how is it possible to say that it was commanded to us by God? The Gemara answers that Rav Avia said, the obligation to write this blessing, to recite this blessing, is derived from the verse, you shall not turn aside from the sentence that they shall declare to you. Really, I would translate as the word that they shall declare unto you, neither to the right nor to the left. Now, there's a whole exegetical history here, but let's do the 5-cent version. The point that's being made here, the claim that's being made here is that the Torah itself says that whatever the rabbis say, this verse in Deuteronomy 17 is talking about judgments that are issued by the Supreme Court of the Israelite people that will meet in Jerusalem, or the elders, the priests that are in Jerusalem, and says that whatever ruling they issue, you should not turn aside from it, but carry it out. So the rabbis say, using their interpretational powers, what this verse means is that if we create an observance, then God says to the Jewish people, it is my will that you carry out that observance. Because the rabbis, the authorized interpreters of my Torah, have created this obligation. So we can say, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, you, God, have commanded us to and sanctified us to light Hanukkah candles because it's an associative principle. You, God, told us to listen to the words of the rabbis. The rabbis said to light Hanukkah candles. Therefore, you, God, told us to light Hanukkah candles, and we can make this blessing. So I want you to understand is that making a blessing, this blessing, formulating this blessing, and requiring this blessing is claiming a certain authority and giving a certain power and authenticity to a particular ritual. So now I'm the chief rabbinate of Israel. Do we have the power, we chief rabbis or the rabbinate of Israel or the Jewish community, do we have the power to do what was done in the past? Do we have the power to basically create a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, a new rabbinic edict, and require it of the Jewish people? And the way that that debate gets crystallized is, yes, we can require Hallel on Yom Ha'atzma'ut, but are we going to require the full Hallel rather than the half Hallel, which is recited on those days when it is only a custom to recite Hallel, but not an obligation. So are we just going to establish a custom of saying Hallel? Or are we going to say, we are instituting a new obligation? Yom Ha'atzma'ut is a new Jewish holiday with as much stature as Hannukah or Purim, any holiday that was created, humanly created Jewish holiday. And so we're going to say, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et Hallel. We're going to say the blessing, you commanded us to say the Hallel. That's the question. Okay. So the rabbis, the chief rabbinate said no. The kibbutz hadati, the Masorati, the Reformed conservative movement said yes. We say a full Hallel, and we say that Hallel at night, and we also have a Torah reading and a haftarah. So this approach is to say we have the power now to create a full-blown new holiday, and that's a debate, important debate. Let's take another question, and then I want to go on to the last section. Another question? Yes.
Alex?
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you
Hi.
for the class. And I'm also very much looking forward to your book on liturgy. I was wondering if you would speak for a moment about that difficult spot between history and memory, where we understand the historical details that went into the creation of a holiday, rather than perhaps being able to pretend that it merely sprang into being whole cloth magically.
Okay. So, okay. Let's jump ahead then and take a look at the, I don't see it here in my copy. The statement from Trua, right? Is that on the last page?
It's on the last page.
Yeah. I, for some reason, don't have it. So, Alex, do you have it? Or Tim, do you have it? Could you read it?
Now.
Yeah.
It's on the screen.
Okay. It's on the screen. Okay. So this is an email that I got from Trua. Now, Trua is an organization that supports social justice and equality here and in Israel, and is very engaged with the Palestinian community in the West Bank. I want to be, there's a minefield here, what terms I use or don't use, so let's bracket our particular political convictions. And I would say that, so this is a main concern of the organization. And it is an organization which is highly critical of the present government of Israel, in part regarding its policy towards the Palestinian people, Palestinians in the West Bank, and also Israeli Arabs. So now, if I am a member of that organization and I want to celebrate Yom Ha'atzma'ut, how am I to celebrate it? So this is a very interesting statement here. Can I? Okay, you know what? I'm just going to ask you, Tim, to read it, because I'm having trouble here.
In Israel, the transition from Yom HaZikaron to Yom Ha'atzma'ut captures the emotional intensity of mourning and joy at once. Join J Street, NIF, and Trua at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, April 28th, as we pay homage to that transition with an online arts evening. By exploring poetry and artwork done by Israeli and Palestinian artists, we will create space for the range of emotion we experience as progressive Zionists on these days. Regardless of our complex feelings about politics and government in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, we can come together to celebrate the rich cultural flowering of both peoples who view this land as a homeland.
Okay, so I find it to be a very interesting statement. And part of what's interesting about it is that it is focusing on matters that are not political. It's focusing really on the cultural. So it's not focusing on the observance of Yom Ha'atzma'ut as I said before, a moment in which Jews achieve, once again, political and military self-determination. And the use of the word homeland, I don't know if anyone recalls where that word first appears in the Zionist vocabulary. It first appears in, what's it called again? In the Balfour Declaration. And that word was chosen very intentionally. So it's sort of navigating a recognition of the fact that the state is a very imperfect state. And it's choosing to focus on something that is, can be shared and valued and held up by all of those who care about the state of Israel. But the truth is, this is a very complicated problem. And I want to make the following point. Which is that any holiday that we know, well, no, not any holiday. Let's take Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is a perfect model here. What actually happened on Hanukkah? So the Al Hanisim version is that the Jews conquered the Greeks, the Seleucid Empire. But if you read the books of Maccabees, especially the first book of Maccabees, you discovered that a lot of what happened on Hanukkah was a civil war. It was Jews fighting with each other. And it was more traditional Jews killing, in some cases, Jews who were more Hellenistically inclined. That's not what we celebrate on Hanukkah, but that is part of the story. So this raises a very real question to which I have no magical answer. And that is, when we know that the history of a particular observance is complicated, do we ignore that? Do we incorporate that? What is the right answer? I will say this, and here, this is just a personal editorial comment, but I'm going to make it. And that is, I think if we lose what is simple or straightforward in the complex, then we are losing something that we don't want to lose, or it would be a tragedy if we lose it. So I would say both with regard to Hanukkah and with regard to Yom Ha'atzma'ut, we know that its history is complicated. I mean, if we go back to the time of the founding of the state, you know that there are definitely Arabs who were pushed out of their homes, for example. Okay? There's a complicated history there. Question is, can we recover something that for us is so meaningful that we don't lobotomize ourselves, we don't forget about the things that are difficult, but we're able to say, but there's something so important here that I need to acknowledge it, and I need to celebrate it, and I need to take a moment for a simple celebration. I need to take a moment in which I say, whatever else is true, I'm celebrating this moment, the creation of the state of Israel, and the opportunities that it provides for the Jewish people. That's the question. I'm not going to try to answer it for you. My answer is yes, we do celebrate that, because that's an important moment in Jewish history. And it gives us something that we would not otherwise have. Let's take at another 5-7 minutes to look at another issue that faced those who created a religious form of observance. Take a look at the sources on page 7. And this is a letter that is being written in 1955, a haskama, or letter of approval, written by Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac Halevi Herzog, who was the Ashkenazic chief rabbi at that time, for the Tikkun Yom Ha'atzma'ut. So, I don't know if that, okay. So this is a tikkun, right? It is a collection of prayers. It's a sidur for Yom Ha'atzma'ut. And it's worth studying in and of its own right, what it includes, what it doesn't include. Maybe we'll say a little bit about it later. I mean, well, actually, let me just mention now. So among other things, it includes paragraphs of Lecha Dodi. Why? Because Lecha Dodi, besides talk about Shabbat, talks a great deal about themes of redemption. So a lot of the stanzas of Lecha Dodi are considered appropriate for the Friday night service, for the Yom Ha'atzma'ut Eve service. That's one example. So the Tikkun is an example of pulling together liturgy from various sources to create a usable liturgy for Yom Ha'atzma'ut. Lecha Dodi, or paragraphs of Lecha Dodi, are one of them. We mentioned before that there is a Haftarah. It is the Haftarah that is read in the diaspora on the 8th day of Passover, and it has a messianic theme, that Haftarah. And here we come to the heart of a very big problem. Let's read this passage and then we'll see what the problem is. So Herzog says, "It is my view that in the case of the miracle that took place in behalf of the entire Jewish people, including our brethren in the diaspora, namely that caused the people of Israel to be regarded with greater respect by the nations of the world," very interesting statement, "that breathed new life into the hearts of the Jewish people in exile after the horrors of the Shoah, and that consequently led to the strengthening of faith, and that proved a safe haven for the entire nation until the advent of the Messiah, if, God forbid, there be persecutions of a portion of the Jewish people, wherever they may be, all would agree that it is fit to establish a day of remembrance in order to strengthen our faith, for this is truly the beginning of the final redemption. But withal, one must be careful and not be excessive in establishing the forms of liturgical observance." So notice Herzog, the tightrope walker here. So first of all, he's telling us this is what this observance means. This is what Yom Ha'atzma'ut means. It has political, national significance, right? It is about saving the people. It is also about the strengthening of faith for him, right? And it's going to strengthen our faith if we see Yom Ha'atzma'ut as the authors of Al Nisim saw Hannukah. How did this come about? How is there a state of Israel? Obviously, God's hand is here. Okay. But he also, so it's fit to establish a day of remembrance. For this is, now look at the end. For this is truly the beginning of the final redemption. There's something very interesting about Yom Ha'atzma'ut, which doesn't apply to other holidays, at least not in the same way. Holidays look back, but they also look forward. Pesach looks back to a past liberation, but if you look at the liturgy of the Haggadah, you see that it's also looking forward. It's looking for a future redemption, future liberation. But the people who composed the Haggadah, and until very recently, those of us reciting the Haggadah, did not have the political or military ability to bring about some national redemption. So it was a sort of passive hope and prayer. But now you have a new state. And you're saying this must be the beginning of the redemption, the messianic redemption that our ancestors prayed for and that we have been praying for. So what do we do? What should we do? How should we act? We're in a different era. Maybe we should take over as much of the land of Israel as we can, because we believe that that's what's supposed to happen in Messianic days. And now we're not waiting anymore for God to figure it out, for the Messiah to come and tell us how it's going to be. Now we have a military and political power. So maybe we're supposed to be doing it ourselves. In that sense, we're thinking the same way perhaps that Ben-Gurion is thinking. And so what does Herzog say at the end? But with all, one must be careful and not be excessive. And I think by this he means two things. He means one, in terms of the religious observances, but two, in terms of the weight that you're giving to this event. Because, and those are related. Those are related. Okay? If I say a bracha on Yom Ha'atzma'ut, on my Hallel, if I read the Torah with brachot, if I read a haftarah with a bracha, for some, that means we are returning to an era where there is a rabbinic leadership that speaks for the entire Jewish people, that can create new holidays. This is the beginning of an era where Jews have a political, military, but also religious power that they have not had for a long time. And what are the consequences? What are the conclusions that are going to be drawn from that? That's the question. It's an important question, dangerous question. I'll just say one more thing about this, and then we can use the rest of the time for questions and comments. And that is, if you look on the page that has the prayer for the state of Israel, which is page 8, is that it? So we read version number 1. So version number 1 was Avinu Shebashamayim Tzur Yisrael V'Goalo, page 8. Barech et Midinat Yisrael Reshit Tzmichat Golatenu, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. But there's a certain second version that some people write. Our Father in heaven, Rock and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, Shetehei Reshit Tzmichat Golatenu. May it be the beginning of the flower of our redemption. Because people are nervous. How much do we want to read into it? What does it mean that the hand of God is here? What does it mean to say this is the beginning of the redemption? We're building up expectations. We're making claims about moving inexorably towards a messianic moment. Do we want to do that? A, because can we be sure that that's happening? B, frankly, because do we believe that such a moment will ever come? And C, because once people believe they're in a messianic era, the way people behave changes, and not necessarily for the good. The rules are seen to have changed. So I'll stop here, and Julia, I guess, do you want to ask questions, or what should we do now?
You can take a couple more questions from the group, and then I'll close in a few minutes.
Okay, questions.
Gary?
Gary, you're muted.
So can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think what we're struggling with is the nature of agency, theological agency, agency of God versus human agency in the context of modernity. And it's interesting that, and with respect to that, Amos Oz, the late Amos Oz, and his daughter in a book called Jews and Words say something. If you read only one page in the Talmud in your life, make it Baba Metzia 59b. So what is Baba Metzia 59b is the story of Achnai's oven, where basically the authority of God, in a sense, is turned over to the rabbis.
Mhm.
Without getting into a lot of detail, it comes down to the majority opinion. And, you know, to what extent is that a turning point for, you know, human agency versus the role of God? I mean, do we think that what has happened in my lifetime anyway with the formation of the state is a miracle? Is this something that would not have happened, you know, if there weren't some type of divine intervention, or not? And I think that's a paradoxical struggle that we all deal with in modernity.
So I think you're right. I would say something else also, which is that if I think that God is involved in this, then I also am likely to see there being some sort of divine plan in what has happened. And that's part of what I was referring to before, which is that's when things can get really, really tricky. Okay, you know, if I see it as a secular event, now we have the opportunity, as you know, Ben Gurion, as Megillat Atzma'ut describes, we have the opportunity to live as a nation like all other nations. And then we don't have to expect anything special, wonderful, anything having to do with a divine plan. But if this is a divine plan, and the divine plan is not simply that we should be a nation as all other nations, which clearly would not be a traditional view, then what does it mean? What is it that we are supposed to do? What is the divine plan? And once you believe that there is a divine plan, then you can go in a lot of different directions in divining what that plan is and in acting. And we know that some of the choices that people make can be dangerous. Again, I don't want to get into politics, but they can be many different things. Not all of them necessarily good. Another question? And then I think or do we have to stop, Julia?
Well, I guess why don't we officially end? And if I don't know if you're able to stay.
Yeah, I'm able to stay.
Okay, so people can continue asking questions, but we'll kind of give it an official wrap up to respect those who need to go at the scheduled time. I'm still trying to summarize what I'm taking from your session about, I guess, you've raised so many questions about kind of how we classify the experience that we're going through, or what we understand to be the deeper level, and I guess just most broadly, you know, as religious people, how do we understand what's happening in the world around us? How did our ancestors understand it? How do we understand it now? I don't know if you want to give a more profound wrap up than I just did. Actually, if you want to, do you want to sort of put a point?
Oh, well, I'll just say, I'll go back to your Shalmi's distinction between history and memory. There's a historical event on May 15th, right, 1947, yes? There was a new state was declared. That's a historical event. And if I'm a historian, I might write about how did it happen, what were the negotiations regarding Megillat Atzma'ut, right, the declaration, and all sorts of other things. And of course, if I'm going to speak about it as a historian, mainly what I'm going to say is, it's much more complicated than anything you think. That's what historians always tell us. And factually speaking, they're right. But as a religious person, what I want, and I want to say this again, and I think I'm entitled to, I think we are entitled to this as religious people. We are entitled to have a moment of simplicity. We're entitled to have a moment where we say, yes, I know that history is complicated, but I need to be able to celebrate something about a moment and bracket the complexities and say, this is what this moment means to me religiously, and this is how I'm going to celebrate it by drawing on the past, which among other things means that I am creating a continuum. This holiday is just one of a series of holidays in the sacred history of the Jewish people. Okay. I will add, and I didn't say this before, so I'll say this now. Bracketing the complexity doesn't mean ignoring it. Okay, so I go to shul, I say the Hallel, Yom Ha'atzma'ut. We have a state of Israel. For me, this is a cause for great celebration. It doesn't mean that I forget about the complexities. Doesn't mean that I forget about the disappointments. But I believe that the disappointments should not overcome the celebration. It is a flawed miracle, if you like, but a miracle nonetheless.
All right, beautiful.
That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to thank Rabbi Diamond for just a really thought-provoking, nuanced teaching today, and just make sure everyone is primed for next week's session as well with Dr. Sarah Wolf, Assistant Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. And her session is called Life Under Siege, the Talmud's Take on Trying Times. She's going to be really related to what Rabbi Diamond was doing today, looking at the interplay of all kinds of questions that arise in moments of crisis, political leadership, questions of unreliable news sources, physical deprivation, economic gaps, all through the lens of the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans as told by the Talmud. So in order to kind of explore what values and priorities were at play there, how they were managed there, and how that might shed light on the tensions of our present moment for us. So that's next week, just to weigh your appetite. But we are officially at a close, and we'll invite people to stay on for more Q&A if they'd like. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I just noticed in the chats, a number of people have made the observation that American holidays, I mean, we know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves that, I mean, perhaps most notably Thanksgiving is a complicated holiday, to say the least. And so, do I not celebrate Thanksgiving? I mean, that is a possibility, and that is a conclusion that some people reach, and I understand it and I respect it. What I would say is that there too, I may decide to say, using this to celebrate what I think is worth celebrating, and I don't forget about or ignore or deny the complexity. That is a path that I walk with Yom Ha'atzma'ut and that I put out there. And part of what I was saying is that from the other side, I mean, if you're the chief rabbinate, you're really battling on both sides. You're battling against the Haredim, and certainly, the Turikarta, who are saying this is Ma'aseh Satan. Okay, it's the devil's work, or it has no religious significance at all. Right? Haredim just say, okay, well, it's a political event. So you're saying, no, it has religious significance. But you're also arguing against those, if you're the chief rabbinate, who are going too far, in your opinion, in instituting new religious practices, and also against a certain type of messianist who says, now that we have our own state of Israel, we have the right and the responsibility to use our military power to create a new messianic state, which may mean chasing out, killing, a lot of different things, because it's a messianic era, it's a new era. So what should we do here? Let people ask questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Richard?
Yeah. Eliezer, I wanted to,
Hi.
Yasher Koach, I very much appreciated the lecture, and I'm so glad the seminary chose to have a lecture on Yom Ha'atzma'ut, because for me it's such an important Yom Tov. But I want to make 2 points. The controversy about Tzur Yisrael, whether it's a secular issue, whether it's a secular matter of the state, the IDF, or it's Kadosh Baruch Hu, is so parallel to the the differentiation between Hanukkah having as its major song Ma'oz Tzur or Mi Yim Hallel. Exactly the same points on both sides. Second point, in regard to...
So just so everyone understands, because Ma'oz Tzur casts it religiously, and Mi Yim Hallel takes a verse that is talking about the power of God and changes it to talking about the power of the people of Israel, a very polemically secular version.
Well said.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And the second point has to do with Hallel at night. I didn't understand at all why Hallel should be at night, even though I am more than 70 years old. Why Hallel should be at night when in every other Chag it is, only in the morning. But then I realized perhaps that has to do with the complexity. Just as on Pesach, we do Hallel at night because Pesach not only celebrates our liberation from Egypt, but looks forward to a future redemption that will include more than just Israel, but the whole world. Maybe we could say the same thing about Yom Ha'atzma'ut. We celebrate, now there's a Jewish state, we have our independence. God was involved in creating that for us, but we're still looking forward to a redemption that will include more people than just the Jews, and maybe there'll be two states, for two people who are looking for a homeland.
Okay, so Richard, you're a rabbi and I'm a rabbi, and I think that is in exegesis, and it's a plausible one. I want to go back to what I think is a minimalist understanding of why Hallel is recited on Pesach at night, the only time that it is recited at night. And I think that has to do with the fact that this is suggested by many, has to do with the fact that this is when the redemption begins. This is the moment, Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu. This is the moment when the liberation from Egypt begins. And so if we take a you are there approach, as I'm sitting at the Seder and I'm reenacting the event, it's a time to recite Hallel. And let's also remember Hallel was recited when the Paschal sacrifice was offered. And so interestingly, right, to recite Hallel at night on Yom Ha'atzma'ut is to suggest a parallel to Passover and to say that this is a redemptive moment of the order of Passover. Quite a daring statement, one could say. And that's what I think saying the Hallel at night is about. This is our Passover. This is, Yom Ha'atzma'ut is to modern redemption as Pesach was to redemption in ancient days. Another question?
George?
All right, two things, please. One, history versus memory. History to me is a fact. Memory is a subjective recollection of that fact. Point two, with all due respect to Gary Goldberg, if I have it correct, when we studied the ovens of Achai's story in our Talmud group, some of us had the debate that this was a self-serving statement by the rabbis justifying their authority, because if I remember, it was Rabbi Eliezer who had the great authority and so forth, and there was challenges to Rabbi Eliezer and so forth, but there was the rabbis putting words in God's mouth, giving them the authority from God. So there seemed to be perhaps an iconoclastic debate regarding the validity of that story.
So with regard to your first point, my short answer is it's more complicated. My longer version of that answer is, let's put it this way. Historiography is not just facts. A chronicle is facts. History, the study of history, is more complex because you're not only interested in the events, you're interested in what led to them, their significance. So that, I mean, otherwise historians would be out of business. Right? And the reason that you can have so many books written about the same events is precisely because they can be understood in different ways. Now, the categories that historians use are different from the categories that people use when we talk about memory. But to say that history is facts and memory is subjective, I'm not ready to sign on to that one. And memory also is not simply making things up. I mean, there has to be some, I always say, this is one of, I think it might be the only joke I ever made up, but it's a great one, which is, there's a heretic who said that the Torah was not given to Moses, but to another man by the same name. Right? The point of that joke is, you can say that the description in the Torah is not a history or not factual, but in some broad sense, it describes an experience that is real for the people who wrote it down. Just as I was talking about the Megillah. Megillah might be a romance. It might not be recording a historical event, but it speaks to diaspora Jews because it is describing their experience. With regard to Tanurach Nai, look, it's, again, there's a poem in Yiddish called The Dummy. And the poem says that there's a dummy in the square, and everyone comes and puts a sign on the dummy that says, the dummy is with me. Once something has been written, once it circulates, what its meaning is, we're going to have a lot of different points of view. Clearly, the story is self-serving in a very important sense. But if we take a more generous reading, right, we can say that all stories and all of memory and the way we construct our memory is self-serving. It's self-serving in the sense that we are using it for ourselves. We're using it to make sense of life. I mean, you could say it's self-empowering, and that can be dangerous. But all construction of memory is self-serving. Willing to take more questions if people are interested.
Janet?
Janet.
Hi. See
Hi.
you Wednesday. I have just
You're glutton for punishment, Janet.
yeah. Just two quick questions. I assume it's in a midrash or whatever that the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days is an effort on the part of the rabbis to reduce the military victory component of it and make it more miraculous, religious type of feeling. That's the first question. And then quickly, the second one was a similar process to what you've done now in your teaching today. Is that also for Yom HaZikaron, or is it a different category altogether?
Okay, so with regard to your first question, wait, remind me again, because now I'm thinking about the second question. Just give me a prompt for the first question.
The oil lasting for 8 days.
Okay. So this is a matter of great debate. There was a school of thought that the rabbis were uncomfortable with the Hasmonean victories and with the Hashmonaim, maybe because they saw this story in light of the failure of the Great Revolt and the defeat of Bar Kokhba. Scholars now believe that that's not the case. And certainly Al-Hanisim talks about military victory, just ascribes it to God's power, but perfectly comfortable military victory. Where the story of the oil comes from and what it's all about, we're not there yet. We don't really know, but it's not necessarily. I would say the scholarly consensus now is that the point of that story is not to say, no, we shouldn't be celebrating military victory, we should only be celebrating God's miracles. See, that's why it's important to read Al-Hanisim carefully, because what we see from Al-Hanisim is that anything can be miraculous. Okay, you don't need oil to last for 8 days to have a miracle. what seem to be humanly constructed and caused events can also be miraculous. How do you know? You don't. But how do you view it? That's the answer. Do you view it through those lenses and see it as reflecting God's hand in history? So, yeah. And your second question, which I already forgot, about Yom HaZikaron. Yeah, so if you look at the sources on page where the chart is, what page is that? Anybody know where is the chart? Yom HaZikaron observances on page 4, right? So you'll see that I indicate that there are some observances that we could characterize as religious, and some as secular, and some as a mix. So Yom HaZikaron begins at night, as Jewish holidays do, right? You have memorial candles, there are special prayers, but then on the other hand, you have secular. I mean, there's much more to be said about it. Let me just say one thing about it, and we should move on, which is that think about Pesach and think about Purim. Before Purim, we have Tanit Esther, the fast of Esther. Before Pesach, we have the fast that nobody actually observes in practice, which is the fast of the firstborn. And so we have this phenomenon in the ritual cycle, the cycle of holidays, that before we celebrate, we have this day of fasting. And there are different ways that we can understand it. So there are all kinds of reasons. Yom HaZikaron, originally the remembrances happened on Yom Ha'atzma'ut, and then it was felt that you can't put those two together. But in any case, the creation of a day of mourning and remembrance right before a holiday is very Jewish. I mean, in other words, it's a kind of construct that we see elsewhere in the liturgical calendar, and it's hard for me to imagine that the decision was not influenced to some degree by these practices of Tanit Esther and Tanit Bechorot. Another question?
Barbara?
Yes, hi, I'm Ezra. Barbara is my wife, but
Okay.
I'm speaking. So if we look at the historical events of Yom Ha'atzma'ut and if we look at these events as something that developed over time, that we say from the late 1800s, when Theodore Herzl convened the Congress, until today, when the holiday itself has become something that is accepted in many places. If we look at Passover and think that Moses was with the Jewish people in different parts of his life for many years before he went to Sinai, that there was something going on among the Jewish people for Moses to get into the position that he was in. There's a tendency here, I'm not sure what to do with it, to put the establishment of a particular celebration, a particular recognition of a Jewish event into a day, into a moment in history, and that's a good way to look at it. But these things didn't start the day before, and they don't end the day after. And that's why I look at Herzl's Zionist Congress and go all the way forward, because the issues that started with that we could pinpoint at least at that place. So I don't know how this fits in with Orthodox leanings, but I'm just curious to know what your thoughts about it are as a rabbi and as a historian.
So thoughts about what exactly?
Let's just say the establishment of the state of Israel, and as well as the Holocaust that preceded it.
Well, that's...
Let's all right, I'll leave that out. The establishment of the state of Israel.
Here's a moment. Okay. I'm a religious person. So to me, Yom Ha'atzma'ut is a religious event. Now, what do I mean by that? I myself am not entirely sure. Here's what I'm sure of. It requires a religious response, which means whatever else it means, a liturgical response. And it means that I have to ask myself, what is the religious significance of this day for me personally and for us as a people? And it also means that there has to be gratitude, which I think is an important part of religious life. Important part of religious life is, am I appreciative of things that I might otherwise take for granted? And I think that this is particularly true with Yom Ha'atzma'ut, because it's interesting. It's easy to say, what have you done for me lately? I mean, we know, State of Israel is an extremely flawed institution, like every country. I don't think that we right now should be casting stones. But anyway, but can I appreciate, I'm just going to speak for myself, what an amazing event and what an amazing fact this is, that after so long, Jews have the ability to determine their own political, military fate. Again, within certain boundaries, reality immediately creeps in to the equation. But this is something amazing, and certainly in light of the Holocaust, and not only in light of the Holocaust, crucial, important, redeeming. So that's what I would say. Now, you don't have to be religious to say some of the things that I just said, but you do have to be religious to say some of the things that I just said. Okay, I'm still willing. What time is it? Yeah, why not? Anyone have another question?
Steve?
Yes. Rabbi Diamond, in your discussion of Purim, you
Yeah.
mentioned that the Megillah was written several hundred years after the holiday of Purim was talked about in the Talmud. What has no?
No. The theories range from the 5th century to the 2nd century. The consensus right now is the 5th or 4th century. We're talking BCE, 5th or 4th century BCE. That's the consensus at the moment. I mean, this goes back again to why history is not about facts. A lot of history or the historical enterprise is about theories or tentative conclusions. Anyway, okay.
So the Megillah was written at more or less coincident with the starting of the holiday of Purim?
Probably not. The consensus is there was such a holiday. The nature of that holiday is debated. And then the Megillah was written to give that holiday a certain meaning or significance.
Right. So that was the question.
Here, look, here's the way to think about it. How do you create a holiday? Okay. So if A, you assume that the Megillah is a romance, it's not a factual record. Okay. So then B, you can't create a holiday by writing a novel. Okay. You can only create a holiday in some other way. So that's why the assumption is that somehow it became legislated or accepted that there's a holiday that we know as Purim. At a certain point, someone wrote a novel casting that holiday, choosing to understand it in a certain way. Actually claiming that it was historical, or maybe not, I don't know. And then this becomes associated with the holiday. That's the theory. I wasn't there, so that's what I can say. All right, I think we should do one more, and then I think it's time to wish each other well.
Table.
Thank you. Mine is very personal. I hope it's okay. But on your handout on page 5, I had a truly visceral negative reaction to something I learned from that handout. So my real name is Tybo, but, and I'll explain why the negative, the coded way to say it is, in my part of Pittsburgh in the 1950s, you couldn't walk around with the name Tybal. My part of Pittsburgh is the part of Pittsburgh the shooter was from.
Yes.
And it did not surprise me. My line is, I grew up with it, even institutionalized in the schools. The difference is they have guns. So when I see those red berries, to me, and I understand things have different meanings. I took the time, I saw the poppies in England, the whatever, but to me, it is so closely associated with Christianity and evergreen trees and the red berries being the blood that doesn't die. If you happen to know anything about that, I know the second one I asked you, it's my second question on something, not part of it, but was there even any discourse? I mean, to me, it's not quite there, but it's almost like deciding we're going to reframe a crucifix.
So here's the interesting thing. I think if you said what you just said to the average Israeli, they would be astounded, because this is happening in a cultural context that's totally different from ours. It's happening in Eretz Yisrael. It's happening within a Jewish culture. So when people are seeing something red and associating it with blood, they're not thinking about Jesus or crucifixion or the blood of the Lamb or any of those things. I understand perfectly what you're saying, and I understand your visceral reaction. What I think is important for you to understand is that this is very culturally determined. I forgot who it is who has on its desk a picture of someone in Israel, a Haredi actually, who dressed up as Santa Claus on Purim. Now, the only way that that could happen is if you have a person who really doesn't know who Santa Claus is, as, by the way, my nieces and nephews don't. My brother lives in Sanhedria Morchevet. They have no idea who Santa Claus is. So if they saw some guy in a red suit, they would think, well, he sort of looks like a chassid, but I never saw one in a red suit. So, we have to be culturally sensitive in the sense that, I'm not saying it's a good thing, it's a bad thing to talk about berries as being the color of blood. I'm just saying cultural context is important here. Okay, this is great. Thank you very much. I learned from you. I hope you learned from me. And I wish everyone well and wish everyone good health. We should all be well.